AI is everywhere right now. Boards are pushing for it, executives are chasing it, and vendors are promising the world. But here's the truth. Upwards of 95% of AI projects are failing right now. And those AI failures have costs beyond just wasted budget. In this video, I'll explain 4 of the major costs of bad AI, including a couple of hidden costs that you might not be aware of. And I'll explain what every executive needs to know before greenlighting a major AI initiative. Hi, my name is Joshua Ebner. I'm a 20-year expert in AI, machine learning, and data science. Let's get into it. Okay, first, let's just start with kind of the most obvious one, and that's the wasted financial investment. So most failed AI projects drain money. They cost cash, but they can also cost money in ways that many leaders might underestimate. So there are obvious spending categories, things like hiring consultants, hiring technology workers, maybe spending on data. That's something that you might not be aware of, but in many cases, many AI projects require data, infrastructure, etc. The spending here can go into the hundreds of thousands, even the millions, depending on the project. And if that AI project fails, in many cases, that money is just gone. But even if the project doesn't fail, even if the project does work, there are often many hidden costs that you might not be aware of. If a project is poorly architected, the infrastructure is set up wrong, or if things just aren't communicated properly, there are typically ongoing infrastructure and inference costs. Whenever you build an AI system, you build it, but then you have to run that AI system on a piece of hardware so that it operates in an ongoing way. We call that inference. And those inference costs can be very large depending on how the project is structured. If that is poorly communicated up front, you could get some very large bills month after month after month. So there are costs for projects that fail. There are even costs of projects that don't necessarily fail, but are maybe poorly architected or when the costs are poorly considered or poorly communicated. Further still, there are ongoing costs of maintenance. For many AI projects, there's something called model drift. It's essentially when you train the model or you build it, you structure it, and it works pretty well. Let's say here's your target and the model is kind of hitting that target. But in many cases, models will quote unquote drift over time and they'll stop hitting the target. And those systems need to be retuned, retrained, maybe re-architected in some ways. And that can add ongoing costs. Now, just a minute ago, I mentioned data. Many AI projects require data resources to work properly. This is maybe a little bit less important for just an off-the-shelf LLM, but if you're going to build, let's say, a RAG system or an agent, you're very frequently going to need documents and other sorts of data that will power those AI systems. That data needs to be collected, it needs to be cleaned, deduplicated, stored properly. There's a lot of data cleaning that goes into building agents and RAG systems. But it goes further than that if you want to build predictive systems. And I recommend for many businesses, predictive AI is actually going to be a better tool. You need lots of data. It needs to be typically very clean data, structured in certain ways for predictive systems as well. So you need to have that data. You need to collect it, store it, clean it. And if you don't have the data, you might need to actually go out to a data broker and buy some data. So the data costs can be very expensive. Furthermore, if the pilot works at a very small scale and you want to scale it up, you want to increase the number of users, maybe your business grows, that's actually kind of a good thing. But in those circumstances, you actually need to be able to scale up the AI system, and that can increase costs as well. So if you weren't accounting for those costs, the cost of a scaled up AI system that you're going to be using as your business grows or the number of users grow, you could again end up getting a series of very large bills that you weren't expecting. So my ultimate point here is that projects that maybe look good in a slide deck or even look good in a pilot phase can sometimes become huge financial sinkholes. Next, let's talk about opportunity costs. This is where we start getting into something that I would consider to be more of a hidden cost. It's something that you're maybe not thinking about initially. The big idea here is that every dollar you spend on a failed AI project is a dollar that you can't spend somewhere else. So, for example, you could end up spending some of the money if you have a failed AI project. You maybe could have spent that on new marketing initiatives, maybe new content marketing, or maybe growing your sales team. Maybe there's some other technology spending or infrastructure spending that you could make instead of building out an AI system. So there are opportunity costs associated with bad AI, but there's also costs associated with deployment of talent. So every hour that someone is spending on, let's say, a failed AI project is an hour that they can't spend somewhere else working on the same sorts of things that I just mentioned. Better marketing, better sales, better operations. So there's an opportunity cost in terms of talent deployment as well. And then maybe the third opportunity cost here is just time. If you maybe make a big investment in AI and it takes you 3 or 4 months, and in many cases, machine learning and AI and predictive systems, these systems can take several months to really get right. Every month that you're spending on a failed AI project is time that you could have spent somewhere else. If you're in a very fast moving market, this lost time can be the difference between winning and losing. So ultimately, the point here is it's not just about the direct financial spend that I talked about in the previous section, but there's also all of these opportunity costs in terms of misspent time, misspent talent resources, etc. I do want to emphasize that AI can work, but if you get it wrong, there's all sorts of opportunity costs. Third, there are potential reputational costs or reputational damage. If you're an executive or a business leader and you end up making a big investment in AI and that project goes sideways, you could potentially have some reputational damage. That includes reputational damage inside your company. You will have to answer to your executive team, your employees who might be angry or frustrated, and your investors or maybe your board. Unfortunately, if you have a big AI project that fails, people are likely to start questioning your judgment. So you need to be very careful about how you invest in AI. This also extends to external reputational costs. If you have an AI system that starts malfunctioning, maybe saying or doing things that are inappropriate, you could have some brand risk or reputational damage. This actually happened a couple of times in the last few years. I am not going to go into the details, but Microsoft actually had an AI system, an early AI system that started really going sideways. And somewhat more recently, in 2025, X.com's AI system, Grok, also started kind of misbehaving and saying some things that were fairly inappropriate. And I don't know if this is related, but the CEO of X.com pretty soon after left her job. So there are risks both internally and externally to your reputation if you have a failed AI project. Okay, next. The fourth major category of costs that I'll talk about here is risk exposure. So if you have a failed AI project, there's all sorts of potential risks that you have around legal, compliance, operations, and security. So for example, with respect to legal and compliance, there are certain types of data that you cannot use in AI or any sort of system where you're doing analytics or making judgments. For example, in banking, there are certain types of demographic data that are excluded from making certain banking decisions, like who's allowed to get a mortgage. There are also laws around biased models. If you have a predictive model or a system that's making some sort of prediction, if it's showing any sort of bias towards one group or against another group, if those groups are maybe protected by law, you could be in some very serious trouble. So you need to have AI systems that account for this, and you need to work with people that understand these sorts of legal and compliance risks. There are operational risks. Let's say a predictive system that's just making bad predictions. In a marketing context, if you're trying to identify the most profitable customers or identify people that are going to churn out of your business, and your predictive system is getting those things wrong, you could end up screwing up your marketing. Those are only two examples, but there's a variety of ways that you could have operational problems if your AI system is functioning poorly. And then, like I said, there are security risks. There are things around data and privacy. AI systems, especially in the case of, let's say, AI agents that are accessing and maybe even have write access to a database, they could potentially overwrite your data. They could retrieve data in an inappropriate way and then leak that out. Now, suddenly, you would have some data privacy risk. There are instances where an AI system could potentially leak passwords or customer data, all sorts of potential issues. So there are security risks if your system is engineered poorly. And furthermore, it's worth pointing out that these risks can sort of cascade. So an operational risk or maybe a security risk could end up blowing up further and creating some financial risk or some legal and compliance risk on top of it. So once again, you need to be very careful when you are building an AI system and choosing teams to help you build those systems. So to close out, AI can be transformative in a business. I've seen it, but only if your AI projects are aligned with business objectives, executed with discipline, and are managed and built with proper risk controls. As a leader, your job isn't just to give a thumbs up to interesting new AI projects. It's also to make sure that those AI projects generate ROI without exposing your company to excessive cost and risk. So if you want to get AI right, subscribe to the channel because I'm going to be posting a lot more content about how to build AI the right way.